The best data stories have the least amount of numbers. People don't remember numbers, people remember people.
Hi, I'm Payal, and today on Design Etc., I'm in conversation with Gurman Bhatia. Talk a little bit about your experience living outside the country.
Now there are terms for people like us, they call it Barbie and Marby and all of that.
Oh, really?
As an Indian woman, you're always questioned. So you're trained to think twice before you open your mouth. Journalism is a highly underpaid profession. I think it's a failure of an industry into not being able to use that talent. So I was the first person at Reuters that was put on the COVID story.
At what point does data visualization stops being about numbers?
The first thing I tell people to do when they ask, how do I make my charts better?
Gurman works at the intersection of data, design, and storytelling, helping people make sense of complexity, not through more dashboards or charts, but through clarity, context, and thoughtful visual narratives. Her journey spans journalism, design, and teaching. And what really stands out is how deeply she cares about how data is interpreted, not just presented. In a world flooded with numbers, her work reminds us that data doesn't speak for itself. Designers help it speak responsibly. In this episode, we talk about what data visualization really is, who needs it, how it shows up in organizations, and how designers, even those not working with big data, can start applying this thinking to their everyday work. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by data, unsure how to use it meaningfully, or curious about where design fits into decision making, this conversation is for you. Welcome to Design Etc. Gurman. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much.
Hi Payal, thank you so much for having me. Excited for this conversation.
Likewise. I'd love to start at the beginning. When you think back to your early career, what first drew you towards working with data? Was there a moment when you realized that this is what I want to do for the rest of my life?
I am actually one of those fortunate people who did have that moment. I think a lot of us keep going through life and working, waiting for that moment. But I can pinpoint it to a classroom. I actually have 2 degrees in journalism and none in design or data or data viz. So when I was doing my second degree, which was a master's in journalism at Columbia University, I took a class that was called Interactive Design and Storytelling that was taught by Michael Keller, who is now an investigative reporter at New York Times, and Clarissa Diaz, who's a designer. And both of them showed me what was possible when you use data and interactive design in storytelling. And it blew my mind. And in that moment, in that first introductory class, I was like, this is why I came to New York and this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I think my batch was of 250 people. That class had maybe 19, 20 people. I am the only one that does this.
Oh,
So
wow. A journalist who became a data storyteller and her professors helped her. That's so amazing.
yeah, like something clicked. I don't know what, but something clicked, and I was like, this is cool. I want to do this. And that's how it started.
Awesome. You've moved across journalism, design, and teaching, right? And at that time, it may not have felt linear, but now when you look back, what connects all those chapters?
So my career trajectory has been journalism to data journalism to graphic journalism to data viz and then entrepreneurship. And it is, I would say, a very progressive, gradual, linear journey only. Like micro tweaks started happening, it's not sudden. What is common across all of them, and I think what is very true for good designers of all shapes and form, but especially information design, which is the kind of design that I do, I think is curiosity. So, which is also innate as a journalist. When I used to be a journalist, one of the things why I went into data viz and more visual storytelling was because I thought that I was not a great writer. As a 21-year-old, I didn't realize that, writing is also like a muscle. If you write enough, you'll get better at it. But that's not the maturity I had at that time. So I
Yeah.
thought that if I don't have that skill, how do I bridge my reporting to another tool for communication? And
Hmm.
database sort of came up in that shape and form. But the common theme has been curiosity. There
Hmm.
also you're trying to connect the dots and find answers. As an information designer, also you're trying to do the same. As a teacher, also, I think so. I do trainings, I sometimes teach in universities. I always keep it something on the side as
Hmm.
opposed to something that I do full time, primarily because I think teaching is a very good way of zooming out.
Hmm.
And we keep in our practice immersed creating, but that zooming out really helps put things into perspective. So actually teaching helps in talking better to clients, and client work helps tell students better about applications. So I think they feed
Hmm.
into each other.
Hmm.
So that is what I would think connect the different aspects that you spoke about.
How do you break things down when you're teaching and to clients? So, because the audience is slightly different here, the audience is like business folks who are trying to make like decisions which will have an impact on monetarily a lot of times. And
Correct.
also, they are trying to help people understand what they are trying to show with the data, right? And with students, it would be different. So, how do you connect that? It's very interesting for me.
So when I'm teaching, in the process of zooming out, oftentimes framework start getting created.
Hmm.
And there are multiple such things that I have come up with in the course of, teaching different subjects. Just being like, is there a way to put this into a process? Is there a way to think of this? If this is a decision that I am asking the client to take, or if it's a decision that we take every time we are doing a data story,
Hmm.
what are those different decisions? For example, one of the things is we look at it as a spectrum of explore versus explain, which goes from exploration, which is story finding, to explanation, which is storytelling. And
Hmm.
database can live on either side of the spectrum or somewhere in between. Now,
Hmm.
that is something that in order to explain to students, I came up with it. But then realized that when we were doing discovery calls with clients, just showing them the spectrum and being like, where on this spectrum do you want the project to be, became very intuitive for them to also explain an idea. So
Hmm.
that's one thing. Another thing that helps is that while we're doing teaching, while we're explaining things to students, we also consume a lot of research. And there is a lot of research around perception, psychology, when it comes to how people understand data, how do people data visuals, etc. So when I am to make an argument for a specific chart to the client,
Hmm.
oftentimes I can pinpoint a research paper and be like, you see here, this is why I'm saying that we should go this route instead of that. And
Hmm.
then it clicks with them, okay, she's not randomly coming up with a proposal. Then the client understands that it's rooted in science and logic as opposed to just an aesthetic choice or something like that, right? So I think those are some ways
Hmm.
where that zooming out and just digging deep
Helps.
into helps communicate better with clients.
Was this a skill that you picked up when you were in New York studying journalism? I'd love to talk a little bit about your experience living outside the country. What was that like, and what kind of skills did you pick up? Because we do see like a lot of students wanting to go abroad, and I also did go abroad, like to study, and we both have come back. It's something that I think I want to address.
Yeah, now there are terms for people like us that are coming up. No, they call it Barbie and Marby and all of that.
Oh,
Bachelors
really?
abroad. Yeah, bachelors abroad return to create in the Indian ecosystem, something like that. But we are masters abroad, so we are technically Marbies. But there are all these people who have gotten exposure in an international setup and have come back to create for this market in this ecosystem.
Interesting word. Like, do men also get called Barbies?
Yes.
I love that. I love that.
So, few thoughts, multiple threads I'll pull in. First of all, one of the things that happened for me personally was that I went for a master's at a very young age. Most people, when they are investing in an international education and a master's, wait for some time, gain some
Hmm.
work experience, and then do a master's.
Yeah, and I went later. Like, I went much later. So we are, I think, extreme personas here. Yeah.
I think that is the better choice to make. I just got lucky. My decision was technically not rational. It just happened to work out for me.
Hmm.
So I was 21 when I went to do my master's. It was right after my bachelor's. Why I went at that age? I would say my family was very keen for me to go spend some money and do a master's, and I just went ahead with it. I was not sold on the idea that I should do it. And then my father sat with me and listed all his assets down on a piece of paper. And it's like, now you see, is it a decision that you can make or not?
Oh, that's good. It was a financially sound decision that you took. And a lot of times I have seen and met people who've gone with a lot of debt. And that's why it's like it gets very difficult for them if they don't get a job, to come back, and then, you kind of have to pay all of that. So it's a lot of stress that they go through, not thinking about the repercussions later, right?
So, to that thought, it was even he supported part of my education, but we did take a student loan.
Okay.
It was not humongous, but it was still 35% of my
Hmm.
eventual expenditure. And I wanted to do that also, some pressure
Oh,
should be
yeah,
there
yeah.
to do something. It's not just, everything is served on a platter. So we did that. And when I went, I think the first thing that hit me was that it's not gonna be easy, because they have this orientation that they do for the whole batch, and then there's orientation that happens for the international students,
Yeah.
in which they primed us that, hey, jobs are gonna be hard to find.
Right in the beginning, huh?
Right
Right.
in the day two. I was like, okay. So I've just gotten there, and I think within the same month, we've started applying for internships that will come 10 months later after we graduate. So, that pressure has started.
Hmm.
And the first semester, you start getting a hang of it. The second semester, there's now momentum in what you're doing, right? You have
Hmm.
picked up momentum, and
Hmm.
then the course is over. So it comes and goes like that. But few of the things that really worked out for me, despite all of this, going there at a young age. I was the youngest in my batch, so
Hmm.
despite going at a young age, what really helped was, I think, when you go to a good university, and the university that I went to is actually one of the best in the world to study this.
Hmm.
So
Where do you go?
I went to Columbia University to do a master's in journalism. So, because of that, your peers are great.
Hmm.
You're in a great peer group from all over the world. I think that was fantastic. That's
Hmm.
also when I realized I'm not a good writer, because here I used to think I'm a great writer. I went there and I was surrounded by all these fantastic feature writers and people who really express themselves beautifully. And I realized, shit, that's not my skill set, which is good. So being
Hmm.
surrounded by people who are much better than you is the way to grow in
Yeah.
life.
Absolutely. You also like meet a lot of people from different cultural backgrounds.
Correct.
And unknowingly, I think that kind of adds back a lot. Looking back, that's one of my core like memories.
So my core memory, I think one was this realization that what I'm not good at.
Hmm.
And the second core memory was the white man confidence.
Let's talk a little bit about this white man confidence. What is this white man confidence? I'm loving these words.
So I think the first month I felt super dumb in classrooms, okay,
Hmm.
because the professor would ask a thing and I would not have the words to respond or something. Like, discussions are happening and I'm not very participative. But all these white men are. They
Hmm.
have lots of opinions and they have lots of thoughts.
Hmm.
And first, it's overwhelming, right? First,
Hmm.
you feel a little bit on inferiority complex also.
You feel like they know a lot and you don't, right? Yeah.
Correct. So
Yeah.
that feeling, first month,
Hmm.
that feeling came.
Hmm.
Then after that, we started giving out assignments.
Hmm.
And all my assignments, I actually used to get great feedback
Hmm.
right from the start. Like, Indians are great students, right? We are taught to be meticulous, and I'm staying up and I'm doing all this thoroughly. I'm also feeling incompetent because all these people
Yeah. So you're
are
putting
like
in
that.
extra work. Yeah.
Correct. So, for that reason, I'm doing well.
Hmm.
And then it hits me
Hmm.
that if I actually listen to what these people are saying, there's not much substance into it. They
Hmm.
are just saying it with confidence. And it comes with that sense of privilege that you have grown up with, right? You have not been questioned over and over again.
Hmm.
So you feel comfortable expressing yourself and you
Hmm.
feel comfortable expressing your half baked thought, even
Hmm.
because you know things and
Hmm.
everybody listens to you. Whereas as an Indian woman, you're always questioned. So you're trained to think twice before you open your mouth. And I realized that the answer was somewhere in the middle. And that realization, then I started putting myself more up there. I started being less overwhelmed by their confidence as well. And that was, I think, a big realization early on, that there are several people in the world who, just because they have confidence, they stand out. So you have to work on your confidence.
Yeah.
And maybe that realization early on was a big blessing in my career that happened. So that's another core memory. And then, of course, discovering something that I actually could do for the rest of my life was great as well. And I also learned to ask for help and push for help. So, for example, in my this interactive design and storytelling class, the professors to whom I owe my career, I wanted to do a project for which I needed to scrape a website. There was no place where I would have learned how to scrape. So I just went to him and was like, "Hey, I need to scrape something for this project that you want us to do." And he said, "Scraping is not part of the syllabus." It's like, "But then how will I do my project?" So he stayed with me afterwards and after class for another 1 hour, 2 hours, and taught me how to scrape.
Oh, wow.
And like, I asked for help. He saw the keenness, he saw my persistence, he
Hmm.
gave me the time. So I think that also, just realizing how kind and giving people can be,
Hmm.
was also a big blessing, and something that then I became mindful of as I went ahead in my career, because
Hmm.
actually all of us are where we are because
Hmm.
several people have been incredibly kind to us,
Yeah.
more than we deserve. That also. But otherwise, of course, it's hard to live abroad. It's a lot of culture shock. So you're also going through that. You're living at home, with outside of home for the first time.
Hmm.
You are learning how to manage your money for the first time in a different currency. You are figuring out how to take care of your health, take care of your physical health, mental health. You're also trying to figure out how to make new friends that come from different culture. You're also trying to figure out how do you keep learning and growing. And then you also need to find a job. So
Yeah.
it's everything everywhere all at once.
And then the visa struggles come in.
And then the visa struggles come
Yeah,
in.
but it's a lot actually. Like why I wanted to touch upon this is when students are going abroad and a lot of people reach out to me because I've studied at SCAD. So a lot of students who are looking to go do similar courses reach out. I'm sure they would be reaching out to you also. And I want to just use this opportunity to tell them that it helps you take that leap into a very different world. It's not all rosy. There are a lot of struggles and you have to overcome that. You have to get out of your comfort zone. Going out anywhere in any country does not even give you that little bit of breathing room to say ki nahi, I'm going to stay in my comfort zone. It literally pulls you apart, right? And while you're going with the thought of I'm going to go study and put my head down and find a job and all of that, but there are so many other factors that come into play, good, bad, and in between all of that. But it's really about finding out who you are as a person. Like for me, there was a lot of personal growth which I value more than anything else. I feel like I wouldn't have been this person if I wouldn't have gone abroad, because I was also living in like with my family and in a very comfortable place. There's no need, but sometimes these kind of things just teach you so much more than what you are actually going to learn over there.
Absolutely. So the way I grew up, I was constantly pushed to make my own decisions. But I
Oh.
know a lot of my peers who went
Hmm.
there and were not even used to making, decisions for
Yeah,
themselves. And that's the most basic thing.
correct.
But it's the most important thing that will determine how the simple thing of I made the best decision I could at that moment, and there's no point regretting it now.
Yeah,
A lot of us have difficulty with even basic things like that.
yeah.
So there are two things. One thing is everybody should step out of the house 100% and learn to live on their own and take care of themselves as early as you can. Great. I think I did it at a great age, and it really helped me from there on. The second piece is if you want that whole experience on steroids, then do it abroad. Um,
Love that.
But it does change you as a person. I agree with it. So for me, because I did it as a young age, I think I had extreme personality changes.
Hmm.
And then I had to bring it back to who I was and find it somewhere in
Hmm.
the middle as I grew.
This applies actually for me also because I think I did have a big transition and a lot of things felt wrong. And when I came back, I was just fighting with my family for like 6 months, like on everything. It's a
Yeah,
given. Like, I think that happens for everyone at every age. And people just start calling you like, oh, you've become this woke American. But what's really happening is you're seeing things in a very different way because you've stepped out of the scenario. You're not dealing with it day to day. But when you come back, things around us like design and how things work at work and how corporate systems work here versus there, a
correct.
lot of that is also different. So there's like, again, you come back into a cultural shock almost. And then you have to recalibrate to kind of find your space, find that in between. So maybe that's why the word Marby or the Barbie word. I've learned a new word today. Thank you.
No, Marvi is what my husband and I call us.
Okay.
Because both of us did masters abroad and came back. Barbie is the actual word. I think for me, because I didn't work outside, so just for context, my movement has been I did my masters in the US. Then I worked there for a year. Then I came back to India. I worked here for another year and a half. Then I worked for 3 years in Singapore and then I came back. So I have worked internationally in two different contexts and at two different points in my life. The first one when I was in the US and working for $15 an hour, and second when I was in Singapore and had a full time job that allowed me to pay off my student loan. And both are very different experiences. The first one, you are, of course, counting each penny. You're very stressed. You also don't know, while you're in the US, you also don't know how visa things are going to pan out. As you said, rightfully pointed out earlier. Fortunately, what I did, which really worked out for me, and because we were talking about students and what they should think
Hmm.
about when doing all of this, was that I didn't know, I was not picky about opportunities when I was in
Hmm.
there. So I did three jobs when I was there. For me, a lot of my peers, when I was doing a master's, wanted to stay in New York and were hell bent on it. For
Hmm.
me, it was more about I have this opportunity to learn here with my
Hmm.
OPT. I'm just going to learn.
Hmm.
I'm going to learn wherever I get the opportunity to learn.
So it's good to be flexible and don't be rigid to staying at a particular place, but look at it as a learning opportunity, and where that takes you, you just go with the flow.
Correct. I mean, if you can take that risk, I think at 21, 23, I should be able to do this. If
Hmm.
I don't do it at that age, I don't know when I would.
Hmm.
And I had all sorts of not just lovely professional experiences, but lovely personal experiences because of
Hmm.
this as well.
Hmm.
So in St. Petersburg, for example, I lived in a hostel because it was a short thing. So I lived in a hostel that was about walking distance from my workplace. I did not need a car to report there because my reporting was more about the media, so I could do it out of an office. But that hostel was a great place. I met so many people from so many different parts of the world.
Hmm.
I learned how to make pizzas from an Italian, and I heard stories from two kids that lived on a boat for 7 years.
Wow.
So like it was great. I fed them Indian food and made them dance to Bollywood songs at 2 in the night. So I have memories, I have fond memories from that experience as well. And professionally, of course, that city, I worked in a building that had all 70-year-olds, two 40-year-olds, and me. So, learning from all these experienced people who used to teach
Hmm.
journalists how to do journalism. To do that job at Palm Beach Post, I actually learned how to drive in the US because that job required me to
Yeah.
drive, report, and all of that. I learned how to drive. I got a driver's license. I bought a second-hand car. It was a 14-year-old car, but I bought it out of my own hard earned money and it meant everything. So, like, there are all these lovely experiences that came out because of the thing, like, okay, Palm Beach, Florida, sure, never been to Florida, will go, works. We'll see.
Awesome. Awesome. So I also heard that you love cooking, right? You just said you fed people at 2 in the night and danced to Bollywood music.
Yeah.
So, who is Gurman besides like being a data viz expert?
Gurman used to be much more fun. As soon as Gurman has started a company, all Gurman does is talks to client, which is fine. I love that too. But what are some, if I have to pretend to be cool, what are some things I can brag about?
Go ahead, brag about yourself.
Okay, I'll brag about some cool elements of my life. I love to cook, of course, and I've told you this before as well. I think for me, working with hands is
Hmm.
like great. I love working with hands, and I think I've picked that up from my father. Like, is also a tinkerer with technology. So I think for me, cooking is one of those things that relaxes me. As a design person, as someone in the knowledge economy, I'm constantly using your brain and I can't draw to save my life. So cooking is one of those things where I can be creative in something non-work like.
It also gives you working with hands, satisfies the sensorial experience. Touch, smell, then you taste it in between. And working with hands generally disconnects your brain and puts it somewhere else almost, right? Like you pick it up and it's somewhere resting somewhere.
Correct. And I think at some point when you live alone, you're also experimenting with food. You're also trying to recreate nostalgia through food. All of us who have lived away from home have tried to create that childhood dish. I can cook 100 things, but one thing I cannot cook is how my mother makes rajma. Like, I don't know. I can't recreate it.
Oh, Punjabis and our Rajmas.
Every Punjabi you speak to will say, my mother makes the best rajma. So,
Guilty
yeah,
as charged.
it is like every person says that,
Yeah.
and I can't recreate that, but I'll create my own sense of nostalgia through my own memories through food. And I love thinking about nutrition. I love thinking about taste. Okay, this is now too soft, we need to add some crunch. This is a little sour, we need to balance with some hint of sweetness.
Hmm.
So, playing with different flavors I really like as well.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
cooking is one thing. Now I don't get to do it as often as I would like to, but whenever I get the opportunity, that's something I like. There was a time where I used to hula hoop quite actively,
Oh, wow.
and I picked it up during COVID. I've hated movement most of my life. Hula hooping was one form of movement that made me happy.
I really love how you look at things. It's almost taking me to this other thing I wanted to ask you, which is someone was to ask you what data visualization is and how do you usually explain it without, it being a jargon.
There are a lot of people collect data, analyze data, do all of that. But after you've done data driven research, the last part of it is communication. Data viz is all about making that data actually usable. Because if it's not communicated well, if I don't explain why this data is showing what it's showing or what it is showing, then nothing in this world will change. So
Hmm.
that final mile of data communication is what data is. It is not about making charts. Sometimes the outcome of a data communication exercise are two sentences or one sentence, and that is fine. The more important thing is making that data driven research actionable and usable. And the data communication part of it helps you bridge that.
You don't have to over communicate the insight. You're showing it and you're communicating it in simple words. So your clients and the people you're presenting it to understand and they're able to comprehend it.
And then do something with it, because that bridge from understanding to action is very important, but without understanding there is not going to be any action.
How does that happen? Like, at what point does data visualization stops being about numbers and starts becoming about what you're trying to communicate or starts becoming about people? What point does that happen?
We see this day in day out, right? When we read the newspaper, when we look at research studies, people throw dumps of data on us. So for example, there is the first thing I tell people to do when they ask how do I make my charts better, that I would say, what is the title of your chart? Does it say something along the lines of percentage of girls with primary education, which is what I called the boring research paper title? Or does it say something like 9 in 10 girls now have primary education, or access to primary education for girls constantly increasing in the last 10 years?
Hmm.
what is the insight? First step, especially when it's for decision making and it's
Hmm.
push action and it is for storytelling, the goal is that your title needs to do that job. You need to know what is it that the person should look at when they look at this chart. What is the key insight?
What do you want them to get out of the chart that they are seeing that should be communicated first?
That should be the starting point, because it's twofold. It is first for you to be mindful of what that insight is.
Hmm.
Oftentimes people make charts without knowing the insight themselves.
Hmm.
Like, let us just, okay, we have state-wise data, let us put state-wise data in the bar.
Hmm.
Why? Like,
Hmm.
let's make a map. Okay, state-wise data, we won't make a bar, we'll make a map. There is no trend. Everything looks the same. So, first, figuring out what is the point you need to make, and also being mindful of then how someone might use that point to do something differently, and then figuring out the visual that best does that should be the process. And I think that one insight recognition, or phrasing that as an insight, is the act where it starts being about action as opposed to staying as a data dump.
And what role does design play in that shift from information to understanding?
So Dan Rome has this lovely book called Show Tell, right? And that is what design helps you do. Instead of me explaining things, I can show you. And then it clicks better and it registers better. So
Hmm.
there's plenty of research that says that if people just look at words, they may understand things. If they just look at visuals, they may understand things. But if they look at words and visuals together, they will understand something better. So it is
So
about that.
so you're showing and telling and combining all of that. So it's
Correct.
communication in a way, but you're designing it.
More memorable communication. So, for example, as soon as I see a spike in a chart, right next to the spike saying this is why the spike happened, that will aid better understanding as opposed to me putting it in a paragraph. That's where database really combines this comms part.
Earlier, before you started your own company, just want to understand, like, was there something that you were noticing about how data was being used or misunderstood that made you want to start Revisual Labs? Or like, what's the story behind that?
I think in today's age of misinformation and disinformation and all of that, I think data literacy and understanding charts becomes much more important. The reason it becomes much more important is I can put anything in a chart, and just because it's in a chart, it somehow feels more believable. I can tell lie. So there is this lovely book called How Charts Lie by Alberto Cairo that breaks some of this down. That what about human perception shifts as soon as something is a chart? So it becomes much easier to lie. So 100% around us, data is misrepresented and misused all the time. We look at data with an air of authority, but actually, data comes with its own biases, because who's collecting data? Humans are. The systems that we create have biases, so which means that the data in turn will also have those biases, will carry those biases. So one is that I think just figuring out how do we build a society that is more sensitive and more, what would be the word, the more aware of how do you read data. One is that, which is a much harder problem to solve. It needs to start at schools, it needs to start in communities. How so many things in everyday life have become just very obvious to us, it needs to become that, which I think is beyond my pay grade. But something that I deeply feel about. The other piece is that several orgs would be looking for someone who would help them do things better, but just won't know where to go. So, for example, if someone wants to do a publication but wants to think through that from an information design lens, and they hire a typical graphic design agency, a lot of thought is put into things looking pretty as opposed to things communicating the message in the best way possible for the information to be memorable and be easy to retain. Because it's a different mindset. Graphic designers will think very differently, and a storyteller would think very differently, even though visual communicators are storytellers. But a lot of people, I would also say, will have fear of spreadsheets.
Hmm.
Like, you give them a spreadsheet with 500 columns and they're like, oh my God,
Yeah.
where do I even begin?
Try starting with 5 columns.
Start with one column. Forget it's a spreadsheet. Think it's someone that you are to ask questions from. What questions would you ask? Think like a journalist. It helps.
When you get a lot of data, when designers who are not data visualizers, when they want to start looking at data or spreadsheets, they should put on their investigator hats like a journalist, ask curious questions, and then find the relevant data to that they can represent.
So I would say stop thinking of that spreadsheet as a spreadsheet, but start thinking of it as a source that can answer some questions from you. A mindset shift happens. That's how I have helped some of my team's fears. So I also have designers on my team who, when first got a project where they had a lot of data, freeze, like brain freeze. So it's like stop looking at the spreadsheet. That's very overwhelming. The client had shared the questionnaire they used to collect the data. Look at just the questionnaire because that's a document. A document is more approachable. It
Yeah.
has no numbers. So I think one thing was this: information design and database studios exist across the world. In multiple countries. Like Singapore has a studio, New Zealand has a studio, London has multiple studios. India didn't have any. At that point, when I had come back from Singapore post COVID and trying to figure out what to do, and had been freelancing for a bit, I started thinking what to do now and what to do next. My husband was doing his MBA in Canada. I was there with him, and both of us were figuring out what to do with life after this course ends. And during that thing, I just started talking to multiple people in the industry, asking them, if I was to start a database studio, what do you think? Would I get work? Just asking different people and asking for their opinion, what kind of markets to target, what to do. Actually, I had a long list of questions where I would just try and understand what different people were thinking. I was doing that work and that research. Multiple people said, bad idea.
And you still started it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I said, I'm thinking of it as two zones, one that does training, one does that creating. Somebody said, you can't do both, you can only do one. And to do creation as a solo entrepreneur is going to be very hard. You need to find a co founder. I got multiple pieces of advice, but eventually, what happened was I got one project that was too much for me to handle on my own. And this was an inbound query. Somebody just DM'd me on Twitter. What had happened to them was that they had hired another agency, wasted a year with them, burnt most of their budget, and ended up with something that was not useful. Useful is the wrong word, usable. And then they came to me to do what that agency couldn't do in 1 year, to be able to do that in 4 or 5 months.
Oh, wow.
And the first thing I did was they had these screens that they had built out. I put them in the trash can. I said, we start from scratch. If I'm doing a project, I will not make it this way. I would imagine it differently. Like my vision for something like this is very different. Then, okay, it was too much for me to handle on my own. So I got a contractor that was a developer. Then at some point, I hit some UX, UI trouble. I'm not a trained designer. So I got another contractor. And then in the course of that project, I was like, maybe this should be a team. And that's just how Revisual happened. They were our first client and they are still our client. So it's been 2.5 years and we are still doing two projects for them. So I think they were so happy with that experience. And this has happened to me multiple times where they have tried traditional UX UI agencies or graphic design agencies, failed, and then come to us. So that definitely means that, there's a different skill set that exists. It is not just design, it is not just development, it is not just storytelling, it's everything working in tandem that enables such work to come out. And the other thing is that because most of the agencies that I spoke about that do this sort of work are in other developed countries, the costs of doing it is much higher, of course. So we are able to do it at a lower cost, competitive cost. In terms of Indian agencies, we're actually pretty premium. Still make it approachable and affordable for a lot of other orgs that would otherwise not have the budgets to do stuff like this. So there is both a market demand in terms of skill as well as that price point that has enabled some of the work that we do to come in.
Talking about organizations, like, have you seen or heard of such roles within other organizations besides Revisual Labs? Like, if someone was interested in data visualization in India, Are there any roles in other organizations, or should people just reach out to Gurman and Gurman is going to find work for all of them?
Uh, Sometimes I think I should make become a headhunter. Um, okay, I have two, three points to that
Sure.
question. Unfortunately, most people that do information design degrees end up in UI UX jobs in India.
Lately, everyone's kind of pivoting, or not lately, I've been seeing it for like almost 10 years. People are just like pivoting more towards UX, UI because there were jobs in there.
Correct. And what would happen often is, say, for example, you were the NID form, a lot of people who couldn't get into UI UX program or interaction design program, whatever it's called, would have information design as a second choice because the course had overlaps. So that also ended up being one path. I've been to juries of these courses, and if I look at the student work that these people do, it's so nice, it's so fantastic, it's so well thought through. I think it's a failure of an industry into not being able to use that talent. So that's one. That is an industry problem that we should solve and we need to solve.
Hmm. And this is the what industry are we referring to? The
Data is the
design.
information design industry I'm
Hmm.
talking about because it's not an industry yet.
It is, it is. I mean, there is. So there are two, right? Like you spoke about two industries and you're trying to combine them into one. So definitely there is a leg of design because that's how you're thinking and that's the output also, correct? But then you're also bringing in things from other streams. I'm seeing that you're looking at data viz almost as a separate industry by itself.
I do see it as a separate industry because the skill set is very different. Information design is a different domain within design, which will have different applications. It will have applications in exhibition design, in publication design, in web design, or experience design, whatever we want to call it. But it is very different from UX.
Hmm.
Data experience and user experience are different things.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other place where a lot of people go into, and this is true for the world and
Hmm.
not just us, is journalism. Because a lot of Reuters, for example, Reuters hires people from NID Bangalore's
Hmm.
masters in information design program every year. They first get interns, and some of those interns then become full time.
Hmm.
So that's one stream. But they're also for bigger, journalism is a highly underpaid profession. So that's another reason a lot of people go into UI UX because it
Yeah, it
pays
pays
much
better.
better. It pays much better. And for Reuters, it works out because it's an international org. But if you were to say that Indian news orgs can absorb students from design with those pay grades, that is not possible. They won't be able to. So you either care deeply about storytelling to take up those jobs or come with a lot of privilege. So higher pay would mean looking for international orgs such as BBC, Bloomberg, Reuters, etc. If you're okay with working for lower pay, then some orgs such as The Hindu has a very nice data team. Even there's another org called Data for India. They do some interesting work. So there are all these other places, but that's more journalistic space. Another space that exists where some people go into is the think tank space. So, for example, Pujal Tiwari at CEW, she's a data journalist and information designer. She is doing fantastic work in the climate communication space. So, that think tank window then acts up as one. The other window that then would exist is product companies. So some product companies, if do hire information designers from a lens of that, maybe they can bring in a different perspective to their product, but I don't know if the work will be that interesting or at that pace. For example, Uber hires a lot from the information design program. Nutanix is a company that hires a lot from information design as well, a lot of information designers as well, because they're people either who are creating visual platforms or creating visual platforms for others. So Nutanix, for example, will create a lot of analytics dashboards for clients so that information design lens helps. Those are some companies that I am aware of that hire for this role. Other than that, it's difficult only. But now I am seeing more and more orgs pop up with that need. The other day, I saw JP Morgan Chase a couple of months ago was looking for some VP in database.
So there are these roles that are coming up now.
And there is this whole thing around storytelling that the internet has been talking about, right? So there
Mhm.
also this becomes the bridge.
And why do you think this skill feels like so urgent now? Or what's happening in organizations or society that makes this matter more than before? I did hear you, emphasize a lot about on like why this should be a separate capability and a skill set, why how it's a separate skill set. Why does it matter so much more now? And why does it feel urgent now, like more than ever before?
I think one thing is definitely true is the whole misinformation, disinformation age. That definitely makes it much more urgent because if somebody is not going to communicate data properly, somebody else is going to communicate false data very effectively.
Gulhan, what do we risk when data is shared without care, context, or design?
So one thing is panic can happen. Like I'm seeing a lot of that in Delhi. It's just this week only. There was that hype around missing persons. That was actually every January, similar number of people go missing. But now it's an issue because some paid promotion is happening for something. And like walking into a mall and the parking is empty and thinking, why are people sitting at home on a Saturday? So panic. One straightforward reason is panic. The other thing I think is what I call data graveyards. So you may collect the data, you may do all the work, but if you do not communicate it well, nothing is going to change. And that data can end up in a graveyard. The dashboard graveyard is another common thing that we see, that we work in organizations where now with Power BI, Tableau, it's so easy to create a dashboard. So people have a dashboard for everything. Nobody is there thinking that should this be a dashboard? Should this be something else? Who will use this dashboard? Like, the design decisions that any typical designer would ask, what is the use case? Who's the user? All those questions, because anybody can create a dashboard and you don't necessarily have to put in the thought or effort that you had to before. You keep creating dashboards and then they end up in graveyards. I know and someone who works at an org where one team got out of hand and created 800 dashboards.
Oh my goodness, 800 dashboards.
They created 800 dashboards in 4 5 years. Now they have to hire a separate agency to just figure out how do we consolidate this. So they've created this monster that we
Mhm.
don't know what to do with. So I think that's another piece, that everybody wants data, everybody wants evidence, everybody wants to look at data, but if you don't think it through, it can go out of hand as well. It may not be usable as well. It may not work out with the goals that you have in the long term. It might be very short term that you're doing something and quick fixes that actually then crumble as time moves on. And there's this another quote that someone said, no, that we are drowning in data and starving for insight. So that also becomes more important because we are surrounded by so much data today. To connect the dots becomes much more urgent, because if you don't, then it's all wasted effort.
I love what you said that we are drowning in data today because there's no dearth of data, but we don't have people who are sharpening the data and turning that into insights which are usable.
Correct.
Actually, first, let's start with the Delhi pollution bit. You live in Delhi, and I saw one project on your website with where you've captured, like you've taken pictures same time different days. So how do you make sense of something like the Delhi pollution,
Hmm.
and what do you do with that data? Like what were you trying to communicate with that project?
I think if you have worked in a newsroom, for people those who have worked in a newsroom, that feeling every year, October, November will come and you have to do one pollution story. Like you have to do it. You can't not do it. So it's a story that's been done to death. And I wouldn't say my story also changed a thing. Nothing changes.
That's sad. That's sad that nothing changes.
Nothing changes, but it's a mesh to solve. And now it's not just Delhi, it's all cities in India. It's everywhere.
Correct.
So, and because we failed to fix it for Delhi, now it's everywhere. It's a much deeper systemic problem. So, when you're living in that scenario, I think you need that reminder, right? And you try for all these different kinds of reminders, something like this. So, it becomes much more important to think of creative ways to registering this in people's minds. And the idea of actually putting a camera at the rooftop was my then editors, Simon Scars. And we worked with the Delhi Bureau. I was based in Singapore at that time. We worked with the Delhi Bureau to try and make sure that they could place this camera. And actually, it's pretty cool that they made a room for the camera so that it was protected by shade, etc. He used plywood and he made a temporary structure, placed a hole in that temporary structure. He created that structure to first create that. And then click the picture of the skyline every hour. And that's how the project came about. So we had all this data now, that all these pictures that they had collected. So because when we look at that PM 2.5 line chart going up, going down, it stopped hitting us that how bad is PM 2.5 500? Like, how bad is it? Even though we may say it's 10x the safe limit or this, that, I can make those points, but it stops hitting us. So, the goal with this project by using photography was to merge that line chart with that photo to be like, this is what the sky looks like when it's 500 versus this is what it looks like when it's 50. So that comparison is very stark, and then it registers us. And that was the goal essentially. And this idea of using photographs to make visualizations called PhotoViz. It's a different category, and I did a different talk on this as well, of what are different ways of using photography in DataViz. But yeah, that was the thought behind this, that when we have become numb to numbers, can we attempt something different, something more visceral to make people feel something? And at that point, I think the piece did resonate with a lot of people. Again, as I said, nothing changes, but any kind of awareness, people talking about it, is also important.
So that's a very interesting story. I'd also love to like touch a little bit upon the COVID tracker that you were a part of building, the COVID-19 tracker. What was that experience like? And if you could talk a little bit about how did you, it was such a serious thing, and COVID's been like one universal thing which has, tied all human beings together in a way that nothing else has, right? And you were a part of that large project. What was that like? And I'm sure you were also like dealing with a lot of challenges. We all were going through so much. And then you were also putting out information in a way that we were all consuming that information, right? So I'm very fascinated with that project of yours.
So I was the first person on the graphics team at Reuters that was put on the COVID story. China informed the WHO, WHO informed the world. I was put on that story. So I was there on day one. So one thing about that's nice about working in an org like Reuters is that you have reporters everywhere. So like strong network of reporters. So their China reporter had actually already started collecting data sets of their own. There's no official John Hopkins tracker and this and that, but she had her own spreadsheet. So I started working with her, giving her more things to collect, and we were working out a way to start putting up more and more stories around this. And at that time, nobody is anticipating the scale that this story is going to go into. I make a watched up basic map of where the cases are that can be dynamically updated. It doesn't look great, nothing. Then few days progress and it's still a story. So in addition to the map, I added 2, 3 charts to it, and then it progresses further. And now it's been 2 months. Then I added one more chart to it, and then I think by May, June, we understood that this is going to spiral. So because of that, then we had a senior person come in, John. John got me and Prasanto, to the three of us then started creating this platform that became the Reuters COVID tracker. Because I knew the data very well, and we of course needed now more hands. We wanted to have separate country pages. We wanted to do it in different languages because Reuters is a wire service, so people across the world consume it. So we also wanted to be available in different languages. We wanted it to be show up in results when somebody looked for Japan cases, for the Japan page to show up and all of that. So we did that, and I think we made the first cut in 2.5 months. We took turns, we split the work, we created different modules, and we figured that out. That was the work part of it. Now, more on the emotional part of it. I was, of course, based out in Singapore, away from home. My parents were here in India. They are, of course, older, so you worry about their health. Singapore was very strict in terms of its border rules. So there's no way I am leaving, because if I leave and I get stuck in India, then I don't know what would happen to my job. Would they transfer my headcount? Would double taxation happen? Like, multiple of these question marks arise. So I'm in Singapore. I'm like everybody else, cooking, I'm hula hooping, I'm gardening, but I'm also doing this. And I was obsessively doing this. I became very obsessed with that spreadsheet that had case numbers and death numbers, to the point where if there's any gap, I would be looking, has that country put out any official release? I would be talking to the reporter in that country. Like, I wanted the data to be pristine. I was sometimes staying up late at night and doing it. And my boss's boss sits in New York, and he saw that I'm online on Teams or something. And he would message me, Gurman, just go to bed. Why are you awake? It's like, I can't. No, this data is not perfect. I can't. You spoke about COVID being a shared experience. I think one of the shared emotion that all of us figured was helplessness. And my way of coping with that helplessness is that, what is my part in this global crisis? I'm not a doctor. I can't save people's life. I'm not even that reporter on the field who's sitting at the crematorium and figuring out what's happening. I am not that person either. My job is to just make sure that people look at the numbers, and hopefully, if they get the correct numbers, they'll decide that now is the time to stay at home. That is the most I can do. My role in this global crisis is to make sure there's good, reliable information out in the world. And that is how I took it. And it was very surprising to me how emotionally draining a spreadsheet can be through that experience. Like, until that point, I never thought that I could cry while filling cells in a spreadsheet. But as someone who was tracking data, you saw it happen, right? Like, you saw, okay, first one thing is happening in Milan. Now the same thing is happening in New York. After a couple of months, the same thing is happening in Delhi, and just keeps moving and happens all over again. So I felt it for a few months, and then after a point, I stopped feeling anything. So you become numb to the numbers. So that was like the emotional turbulence during that time. And yeah, ultimately, I think COVID burnt me out as a reporter, and I wanted to take a break after that. So I decided to leave Singapore and came back to India, not knowing what I wanted to do, but definitely feeling the need to take a break.
So COVID played a part in you deciding to come back home. Mm.
100%.
It was the same for me as well, but it did play a large part because we all felt a collective grief, we felt a collective fatigue, we felt a collective burnout, there was collective depression, and still the world just went on. I mean, that to me is mind boggling actually. We weren't allowed a big pause. Like sometimes it just felt like it would have been great to just hit pause for a few days and give like a collective global holiday. And I think a lot of organizations did that. In parts it was done, but this experience also brought all of us closer together. So this is another thing that I was reading and I felt that you quoted, these are your words, not my words, but people are not numbers. You look at people as not numbers, but as people. And this COVID story also kind of connects that in a very beautiful way.
I think when I started my career, and this is back at Palm Beach Post, I think, yeah, Palm Beach Post, I met up with a very senior editor there who used to work at the Tampa Bay Times. And I asked him, and he'd been a data reporter for over a decade. I think 1.5, 2 decades. So I asked him, this is my first data reporting job. Any tips? And he said the best data stories have the least amount of numbers, because people don't remember numbers, people remember people.
This is so beautiful and it's so true. I mean, that's what you're trying to do at the end of the day, right? Like you're trying to narrate a story. And if we also go back in time or even now, we remember things through stories, through and not through big numbers or data. And data also is actually stories, right?
Again, as I said, it's just about meeting the right people at the right time. So just lucky that as a 21, 22-year old, this wise man said some wise words. Then just that was stuck with me throughout my career. Yeah, so I think it's that perspective again, which goes back to the insight part that we've been talking about. The moment you start saying that instead of okay, 80 million people did this or whatever, but figure out what that means. So then you start moving backwards to the story side as opposed to just throwing numbers at people who are sick of it. One of my friends says that, you don't want to write a paragraph that reads like a laundry list. Laundry list as in shirt 200, pant 300. Like it's not like that, right? It's not a laundry list. If it's a laundry list, just make a table. Don't tell people the data, tell people what the data means. And that framing again, so in our COVID tracker also, we thought through some of this. Instead of saying that these are the number of cases that are coming out of a country, we said this country is at X% of its peak. So we made it relative that this country is currently at its peak. Stay home. Now this country is 1% of its peak. Things have died down. It's not as bad as it was. So another thing was, at one point we added the vaccination page when vaccine started becoming available, and within that the story around us was that of inequality in terms of access. Richer countries were buying more vaccines, hoarding for themselves. Poorer countries were left behind. So I chose to put country GDP per cap on the page itself, like compare vaccine access with GDP per capita. So sometimes even thinking, so once you think about these questions, then even in a dynamic dashboard you can add more context and more meaning. You just have to think through with curiosity what are the kind of questions you want to be able to answer.
And you were trying to bring in transparency over there with adding the GDP instead of every time saying rich country, poor country, getting vaccine, not
You
getting
see it,
vaccine.
right?
You
Instead of
see it. Correct.
you
Correct.
see it.
Yeah.
So it's both ways. But without that thought that inequality is a story that we want to put on our vaccination tracker, how else would you answer that?
What's your point of view on quantitative versus qualitative data? And how do you bring the two together and make sense of it in a collective sort of way? And how do you decide what is important when? What kind of data is important when? And how do you decide to bring the two together and make sense out of it?
So, a typical revisual project or the dream project or the ideal project actually has both. This is like my dream, but of course, because we do a lot of client work, sometimes we don't have both. We have to also work with things that the client already has. So, that's one piece of it. Why both? For me personally, quant will often tell you what is happening. You will see trends, etc. Qual is very important to tell you why something happened. And to close the loop and to make things actionable, you have to give people the why. Otherwise, also to make it more memorable for them, they also want to know the why. So, for example, there's one story that I did ages ago that was on Bollywood songs, on how the female solo has declined in Bollywood. Now, for that particular story, I had worked with like quant data. I had a data set that was tagged by songs and singers, etc. And then I saw a trend that female solo has declined. Okay, now I have to answer why. Because if I just say it's declined, it's boring, right? It's not interesting. So then I started talking to experts. I called up few people. I spoke to singers. I spoke to musicians.
Did you notice this on your own, or was this a project? This was a personal project that you noticed a trend that female singers in Bollywood are declining, and you noticed this, and you said, I have to do something about it.
It was the story I did when I was at HD. The thought came by watching an Anupama Chopra interview with few singers, where one person had an anecdote that I don't know how we ended up with every song being sung by Lata and Asha to a world where everything is sung by Arijit Singh. It was an anecdote. And I was like, I wonder if I can prove this. I went in, I collected the data, and this is something I did on the side because it's not a time sensitive story. And I think it took me around 2-3 months on the back burner to collect, clean the data. And when I actually make the chart, I saw it. It was declining. And I created a methodology for it and everything. So now, once I saw the decline, the interesting piece is to then report why it happened. That came from call. So I spoke to industry experts and other people to try and understand why this decline is happening. So someone said that, the lip sync is dead. Earlier, you used to lip sync. Now, the movie can be about a female protagonist, but a man can sing in the background because she's happily walking on the street while the song is playing. That's one. That's a technical thing. The second thing is the story itself has changed. Cinema used to be much more around family first. Now it's much more about society and other aspects. And when it was about family, what happened? The mother got a song, the sister got a song, the heroine got a song, the vamp got a song, the best friend got a song. 5 songs, women done. Right? So there were all these interesting perspectives that made sense.
And then how that changed? How did that change?
So how did now movies look very different? It's not about, that because that lip sync is dank, it's not about like a character getting a song. And the movie itself is very different. We are talking about people's careers, we are talking about ambitions, we are not talking about families and just the turmoils that come with family. So there is that concept of vamp has also disappeared, right? So cinema has changed. So all of this context came through qualitative conversations. This the data cannot tell me.
So, because the stories have changed and because what cinema is showing us has changed, the role of women has changed and moved. Therefore, the characters have reduced. So, therefore, there aren't more women who are getting songs. Like so many movies you see, which are especially like the blockbusters these days, there's just men in the movies.
So I think pros and cons, right? So for
Hmm.
example, there's something called the Bechdel test. There are actually many tests like these, but one is the Bechdel test, which is if you're watching a movie and two women talk to each other about something other than a man, and those two female characters are named. So three conditions it has to meet. One, two female characters are named. Second, the female characters talk to each other. Third, they talk to each other about something other than a man. If this condition is met, then the movie passes the Bechdel test. Okay, so for example, Three Idiots fails this test. So I think there are much better ways to measure that female participation thing in movies. Like the Bechdel test is like a very basic test, and many movies will fail that. But I think older movies may have, even though there were a lot of women, but they were still talking about men. So it's not as meaningful, is what I would say. It's just that now you have fewer songs in films. Then the songs are not tied to characters as such. The songs are more tied to situations. And then the song can be played in the background. You're not lip syncing. So, for example, if you look at Queen, there's so many songs where Kangna Ranaut is on the street and a man is singing in the background because she's not singing. So because of that, but I would say it's a great movie about a woman. So it's hard to sort of pinpoint to one reason, etc. But it's still interesting to lay down the different things that have happened. Without it, the story would feel a little blank, right? So the why and the call really helps, and that just comes from curiosity. Currently, I'm working on a lovely client project that is for an impact investing firm that has a huge quant sample set of about 5,000 households in India, but also has a qualitative piece to support it. So the idea is to marry the two and tell the story through that. And it becomes a much more powerful way of doing it. Recently, we did something for Quest Alliance that was just call. So this was about how young Indians behave on the internet, or what is their relationship like with the internet. So there's this young person that thinks that YouTube algorithm is actually maybe tweaked by a human. So there's someone sitting behind tweaking it. Somebody feels like that. There's another person whose parent does not want them to look at certain websites and is very, very particular about it. There's someone who has learned video editing using the internet. So it's not talking about like our work, at least. The goal of that was to lay out some of their experiences enable you to do that. So we actually made a Where's Waldo sort of interface and explore these stories. So here's the girl who thinks that there's someone who's sitting and controlling what this village sees on YouTube. There's this guy, this one knows that I need to be very mindful because it wants me to incite some reaction. So, we thought of, because of it was this qualitative piece that they wanted us to pitch in. Then we thought of it as this explorable canvas where you could look at some of these stories.
This is such a beautiful way to represent stories.
And you can actually see it in multiple languages as well, because the stories that these people shared were in their own languages. They didn't express their ideas in English. They expressed it in Odia, they expressed it in Hindi, they expressed it in Gujarati. So the client also wanted to make sure that it was available in other languages as well. So yeah, but here this is purely qual, right? That is the idea is just the what we call case studies, right? In corporate jargon, it was just to give perspective of how different people think and just leave you with that impression or that memory, as opposed to telling you that 20% people think this, which they did in another report. Sometimes it's constraints also that determine things. So for example, even though I would have loved to marry the qual and quant, we didn't have as much time to be able to do that, so we did the best we could. So it's also a factor of constraints in terms of time, budget, etc. But in most cases, I would say both are needed. Quant is to tell you the scale and magnitude, and qual is to tell you why and give you the memory of what that experience actually looks like.
So, for the designers who are listening to this episode, Gurman, if someone doesn't work with large data sets and they still want to like experiment or learn, how can they begin thinking like a data storyteller? So, how would you say that they can apply something and start using it at their work?
I think part of it is first exposing yourself to good work around this. I think it's also about imbibing that, right? So on my website, I actually have a inspiration. I don't update it as much as I used to, but I have this data viz and data journalism resources page on my personal website. And within this, there's an inspiration section. So this is like places that have been inspirational for me to look at when it comes to data viz. So just going into something like the Information is Beautiful Awards showcase, then just seeing other people's work over the years can be one way. So expose yourself to work like this is step number one, is what I would say.
You have archived all of this on your website.
I have a page that says what are blogs you can read, podcasts you can listen to, communities you can join. I used to update this page a lot more, but it's still pretty solid.
It's a great starting point, I would say. It's a really good starting point for someone who wants to explore.
And then go into your rabbit holes. But the other thing I would say that has helped me is I learn a lot by doing. I am one of those people, and I think most of us, we remember things when we create and we use the knowledge that we have acquired. So personal projects would be a good starting point. There are multiple designers that do this. There's a lovely designer called Nomeshwari Reddy who works at Samsung, I think, but then on the side on LinkedIn makes these illustrative charts about things that she observes in the universe. Sometimes she will tag how many people in a bus were on their phone versus not, and just would make a database of that. So that she's doing it just for fun, but it's using that muscle. So I think finding ways and opportunities of things that may give you joy, have you apply that muscle. That is the second thing I would say. The third thing I would say, which I should have said much earlier in this conversation, so I also run a small community with several other people called Vischitra. So Vischitra is a data viz community for India. We also do an annual conference every year in June, July. Last year was the first one. that happened in June. This year it's in July, on 3rd, 4th July in Bangalore. And again, the idea is to bring people from different disciplines who do data viz together under one roof and have them learn from each other. There's also a WhatsApp group. So what has happened is that somebody might share their work, somebody might ask for feedback. So you also learn by observing. That can also be a great platform to look at what people are doing. You were asking about jobs. So within the Vischitra WhatsApp community, there's a separate jobs channel as well, where people can look for jobs. Sometimes people also post needs for a collaborator there. So if you're, say, an illustrator, and someone who does data viz needs an illustrator, one bridge can also be pairing up with them and figuring out and learning that way. That can also be one frame to
And
think.
how can people get onto that WhatsApp group?
Vischitra.com, if you go, there are links to all everything. There's link to the conference, there's link to the WhatsApp group, everything.
This is amazing. You are truly like pioneering data visualization in India.
No, no,
And
this is not, I'm not doing it alone. There are many people.
no, of course, you're doing it with a community, but you and some others are collectively, if you prefer me to say that,
Yeah,
collectively with a group, you are trying to make this a separate capability in itself and pioneering data visualization, bringing people together who enjoy visualization and data storytelling together. So
yeah.
that's really amazing. Can you share a moment where a small design decision
Mm.
completely changed how people understood data to turn data into a visual? Like, what are some questions? While, yes, they should be curious, and when they are just starting out and when they're trying to apply it to their everyday work, what are some questions they can ask?
Sure. I think I will talk about one piece that I think is really is a differentiator, and it goes back to the storytelling narrative piece. I often think of two, three things in a project. The first one is what is the larger running visual metaphor. So I would correct myself. This is how we think of things at Revisual. That when we are working on something that has a narrative goal, we often think of a larger visual metaphor that weaves into it. So, for example, for this story, this was done for IOM and the UN, and it was about people leaving from Ukraine and going to other countries. And most of these people move because the space was blocked. This movement was happening through trains. Whole page is uses that metaphor of that train journey throughout. So first I say, okay, which are the different places they went to from Ukraine? Some went to closest country, some went further out. And you are explained different aspects of it. But then as you get into it, now it's about that journey. And the design is also made like that. So that train journey is the running visual metaphor. You are showing it as stages of that person either coming out of the train or sitting in the train, and what is happening in different parts of that experience. What happens when they come back? What happens when they are struggling for aid in another country? So one piece is this. And the idea is to again then thinking how can this become more of an experience? And I think this is something that more designers will be comfortable thinking about. First, instead of just putting data in chunks, think as an experience. Is there a larger visual metaphor that you can think of? That comes more in the art direction space when we do work like this. The other piece that I would think about is what are the different narrative threads that you can add, and that can look different for different projects. For this project that we did for GIZ, we introduced a narrator to explain different aspects of the story. So the narrator comes in the beginning itself, and then as you go through the story, she will come in and she will explain things to you. And it's written like that, but that narrator is that narrative thread of walking you through different aspects of it. We have done this in another project that we did as a PowerPoint deck also. So this is of course a story, but you can use the same technique elsewhere. For another project, this was the investor relations website that we did for PhonePe. They had all these stats that they wanted to highlight at the top of their story. top of their homepage, and like how many users, how many transactions, how many merchants, basic stats. But it was bothering me that how do I tie these things together? It turned out if I looked at the company vision, everything was in there. So that vision statement became the narrative thread. So I often, obsess over this. What is the narrative thread? How do I tie these numbers together? Like, these are two things that I think, even in the work that you're doing, you can slightly level up, thinking through a running visual metaphor or thinking through a narrative thread. Those are two things that I think can be starting points for people who already do this sort of work. Other third thing I would say is, again, just writing, thinking of first the message that the chart needs to communicate, and then thinking how it should look, as opposed to just obsessing over aesthetics. A lot of designers might hate me. I, of course, believe that things should look beautiful and aesthetic and elegant and all of that. But I first think about story, first think about meaning, because even the best looking story, if there's no story, will fall flat. What you are saying matters a lot. So, thinking and spending time on what you're saying, and then thinking about what's the best way of saying it and how you should say it, can be step two.
I'd love for you to leave a parting gift for our audience. And if you had to offer a simple framework or a set of prompts for designers that they could keep beside them while working with data, what would it include?
So I've been talking a lot about stories, narratives, and all of that. And I think several years ago, in the attempts of in one of the talks that I gave, I came up with some story frameworks. They're actually not like 100% my own. They're adapted from stuff that we learn as journalists. It's surprising to a lot of designers, but it's actually very basic for anybody who's gone to journalism school. They're storytelling frameworks, and they exist in some shapes and forms.
This is my favorite part. Like, I get very excited about frameworks. I mean, they just help you to absorb information faster. You can refer to it quickly and go back and try to apply it.
So there are some story structures that we, learn as journalists that I've thought through how we can apply to data storytelling. And just because some of the examples that I show are more digital and web work, because I do a lot of web work, think of it more as order that could exist in a deck, could exist in a handout that you give out. It's more about the flow and less so much about the form. So the first and most common one is the inverted pyramid. And all your page one stories that you open in newspapers actually follow this structure, where it opens with the most important thing and then slowly keeps adding more context. The idea is that if I stop at paragraph 2, I will not be walking away without any important information. So most important information I would already have. And it works great for, if you're working with very busy stakeholders, if you're talking to higher ups that really pressed for time. So sharing things in that structure where they can skim through information can be great. So big numbers or most important insight should be on top. So this is a piece that we did when I was at Reuters, and it really starts with this, that, record low rainfall has happened, and because of that the place is drying up. It's the fifth driest July on record. So I have established no rainfall, very dry, right up top. And then as I scroll through the page, it will just give me more and more information. Okay, less rainfall. So the vegetation is also decreasing. The farming belts are the same as the places where vegetation is decreasing. And it's not just this, the soil is drying up. So it's just adding layers and layers of information. But if I wanted, I could have stopped at scroll one also.
So, if someone wants to just grasp the information very quickly, they can just see the topmost thing and get done with it.
Correct. So that's the inverted pyramid. The other structure, it's a normal pyramid. This is something I created. Okay. This is not actual thing.
It is
This
an
is
actual thing you've created.
It's an actual thing that I've created. It's not a tried and tested long term existing thing. Inverted pyramid, it's very standard. So this, I think, works very well where you slowly build and expand on a concept. So sometimes what will happen is, especially if you're working with very technical information and there are layers and layers and layers, it becomes very hard to say this is the most important thing, right? You have to explain things a tad bit, and data can be great at doing that. So this story came out many years ago, but I think it used this technique of building on a concept step by step beautifully. So it's designed like a stepper, kind of like a glorified slideshow, and it goes like, if I it will say that 84% of black elementary students in this particular county in the US are failing state exams. Almost every other county does better. Only seven of these many counties do worse. All are poor rural places. This place has four times as many students as all of them combined. So it's building one by one. It's really walking you through it. And then it says that, earlier these schools used to be very integrated, which means that black populations and other ethnicities were mixed. Slowly, as the board abandoned integration, there were certain schools that became extremely black. So segregation became quite, their test scores also got worse. It transitions from this where it's showing integration, now when it's showing test scores. Like the segregation also led to worse scores. So it's telling you a very complicated story through data, and the data is actually supporting it. But because it's working on progressive reveal, it moves the story forward. And this can be a very powerful way to tell something complex. But they also do it with like very tight copy. Every time you come to a slide, it's just one sentence, one point, and it's just moving one point further with every step. I could have done this as a PowerPoint as well. So this can be one way of telling a data story where you progressively move the data in the direction that you want the narrative to go. And this is a very powerful way. I'll tell one more.
The martini glass.
Two martini glasses we'll look at. So there is one martini glass which is very, chronological. So it will start with key facts and then headline, and then I'll go step by step. Okay, this happened and this
Yeah.
happened. This can be one martini glass. I won't show the example in this. People can look at it in the blog post. But another thing can happen if I spill the martini glass. So if you spill your martini, what can happen? And this is where I think design and interaction and experiences can become very important, is that you first have something that is author driven. So as someone who is explaining, you are guiding the reader or you're guiding the listener. That is one thing. And then it opens it up to exploration. So explain, then explore. The example will be this story. So this is, we have spoken about COVID. So this one was to explain how herd immunity works. And it shows it through simulations that, how disease spreads in different vaccinated populations. It shows you, okay, if they're vaccinated communities, how does disease spread? So it's showing you all of this, but in the end, what it will do is it gives you a simulation where I can change different parameters and see how that spread changes. If vaccination increases, how does the spread change? So the idea is I first explain the science and then let you explore to see it for yourself. And this can be a very powerful way of storytelling as well. So these are some frameworks that people can use for different contexts.
Thank you so much. This was super interesting and super helpful. I'm going to make it a point to also explore some of these methods in storytelling. One final question, Gurman. What's one idea you hope stays with people long after they've finished listening to this episode? What's one thing that you hope, they'll take away from here?
As designers, and this I'm emphasizing more and more, because and design can be functional, design can be aesthetic and so much, but thinking more about the function when it comes to data communication and putting data forth, as opposed to thinking more about the form. The form matters, but first, if you're clear in the function, the form will come. So, spending more time figuring out the function and less time figuring out the form, especially when we're making charts, I see a lot of people starting with the form and retrofitting the function, and that's where things sort of collapse. That is one thought that I would have people stick by. And the other thing would be to just create, like make. Some people ask me, as someone who didn't study coding, how did I become a coder? So I can also code. And I tell them I didn't sleep for 2 years. So for 2 years, I was obsessively doing projects and making things that I wanted to create. So obsession is good sometimes. That's also how you push yourself and you grow. I believe so much in immersion. Immersing yourself in a subject is so gratifying. Currently, on the certain client projects that we go on, I am just breathing, living, thinking about it left and right, and I enjoy that process. Maybe my journalistic brain or whatever, but that process of really, really immersing yourself in a subject can be so fulfilling, so gratifying. Instead of thinking I need to give this 4 5 hours, try living that subject for some time and see what that makes you feel, and then take it from there.
So, obsession is great. Obsess over what you're doing and have fun while you're doing it.
Very important.
Have lots of fun, do fun projects. And the third thing, which is also very important, that have context matters more. So, function and then form, not the other way around. So, I love this. And thank you so much, Gurman. It's been a pleasure talking to you. It's always fun to just talk to you about your ideas and thoughts. And it's truly inspiring, and I hope like our listeners can take away lots of learnings from this episode. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun. I know I talk a lot, but I hope at least part of it ends up being useful.